Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, January 15th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich and today I'm recording from Jacksonville, Florida. Well, today, of course, we have to start with our Patch Tuesday review. Microsoft released updates for 209 vulnerabilities. I think that's quite a bit higher than what we usually see. 12 of these vulnerabilities are classified as critical. 5 have been disclosed prior to today. And then we also have 3 vulnerabilities that were actively exploited, making them zero-day vulnerabilities. So let's start with some of these zero-day vulnerabilities. Now, all the already exploited vulnerabilities do affect Microsoft Access, and there are actually 3 distinct remote code execution vulnerabilities that are being addressed with this update. They're only rated as important, which is a little bit odd for remote code execution vulnerabilities, but there is a reason behind this. In order to exploit the vulnerability, the attacker actually has to convince the user to open a file in Microsoft Access. So this is more like some of these Office vulnerabilities or such, where the victim has to open a document, which is less likely also with Access. And the patch actually just blocks some of these malicious or potentially malicious document types that could be used for code execution. And out of the 5 already disclosed vulnerabilities, 3 are assigned to Microsoft Access. Haven't really run into Access in quite a while, but I'm sure it's still around. And in this case, it could lead to remote code execution. Microsoft only rates these vulnerabilities as important. Haven't really seen Access sort of being exposed a lot. Way back in the day, a couple times with web applications. But again, not anything I've seen recently. There is an interesting Windows themes spoofing vulnerability. The problem with this already disclosed vulnerability is that it does leak NTLM hashes. It's yet another one of these vulnerabilities where you're being tricked into establishing an outbound SMB connection, in this case by installing a malicious Windows theme. And the 5th and final already disclosed vulnerability is in the Windows App Package Installer. Of course, installers often do need elevated privileges, and if they're not sort of constrained correctly, that's when you're ending up with a privilege escalation. Overall, I don't think these vulnerabilities are all that necessarily critical. Of course, they're all rated important, but also none of them is terribly straightforward to exploit, in my opinion. And NTLM hash leakage, you better already have that solved. There were so many vulnerabilities with that, and there are probably many left out there that have not been addressed yet. Let's take a quick look at some of the critical vulnerabilities. We have an information disclosure vulnerable in the Azure Marketplace, then in branch cache, remote code execution vulnerability, Microsoft Digest authentication remote code execution vulnerability. That one actually looks a little bit interesting because digest authentication is used a lot in HTTP and such. So this could have quite a substantial attack surface. Microsoft Excel has 2 critical vulnerabilities that lead to code execution. That's just like what we talked about earlier, where someone opens a malicious document here. Microsoft Purview information disclosure vulnerability, and then another sort of authentication related vulnerability, the Spinego, at least that's how I always pronounce this. Security mechanism also suffers from a remote code execution vulnerability. Again, this is widely used across the network. So again, a nice sizable attack surface here. Just a little remark also about the Excel vulnerability. That one affects OLE documents. I'm sure Didier, once we have an exploit for this, will have some tool to dissect the document that triggers the vulnerability. But at this point, we don't have any additional details about these critical vulnerabilities. history usually shows that within the next few days or couple of weeks, we may have a couple of researchers who initially reported these vulnerabilities to Microsoft, provide some additional details. So certainly in particular for the authentication-related vulnerabilities, the digest one and the Spinnaker one, I would pay attention there because, like I said, the attack surface is probably there. You may have some of these services exposed to the outside, and that's sort of the exploits or the vulnerabilities to watch out for. But it's not only Microsoft that has patches for us or security advisories today. Fortinet published an advisory with some details regarding some compromises that Arctic Wolf observed last week. Apparently, those compromises were due to an authentication bypass in Node.js in the WebSocket module. They only affect older versions of FortiOS and FortiProxy, like FortiOS 7.0, and then FortiProxy 7.0 and 7.2. Other versions are not affected, and for the affected versions, there is now a patch available. But what Fortinet really is driving home here is that you should not expose your admin interfaces for these devices. Well, we have multiple vulnerabilities like this in various enterprise perimeter security devices a week. So I say it again, do not expose those admin interfaces. Put them behind a VPN, hopefully not an SL VPN that is vulnerable itself. However, sometimes just isolating the admin interface isn't enough, in particular if it suffers from a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Last week, I mentioned cross-site scripting vulnerability in the Paessler network monitor, PRTG. Well, this one has been addressed now. It had already been exploited, had been known for at least a week now. But yes, there is a patch available. Well, and this is it for today. Don't really have more time for more patches. There's the usual Adobe stuff, of course, and a couple others like SAP and such, which we don't have the time to cover here. Hope you liked today's episode. Please recommend it to your friends and enemies as usual. And thanks, and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.